Good morning, everyone. It's Mark Flynn again. It's great to see such an excellent turnout today for our webinar entitled Collaborating More Effectively in Microsoft Teams. So in today's 30-minute webinar, we'll take a closer look at some of the features that can help your people be the most productive possible. Now, the core functionality of file sharing and co-authoring of content in Microsoft Teams is massively, and I mean massively, underutilized. So in this webinar, we're going to focus on how you can get the most out of collaborating on content and files and outline what best practice really looks like. Now, for any questions you might have, please post them in the Q&A top right-hand side of the screen, and I'll make sure we'll address as many of those today, but most definitely follow up on all of them post today's event. Briefly, let me say a few words about Bedrock. Now, we exist to help our clients become the best they possibly can by using technology in smarter ways, providing a full range of IT and cloud services to help you run all or part of your IT. Now, we believe the current IT outsourcer or managed service market is failing its customers for three key reasons. Number one, they don't understand your business and how it uses IT. They only provide what I would call a generic service. Two, they're not interested in helping you maximize your spend on IT. They simply see you as a monthly paycheck. And finally, number three, they don't understand your business and cannot advise on how IT can be a strategic asset and not leave you with something that simply belongs in the ark, really. So how are we different? In summary, we believe it is all about getting smarter, working on the premise that what gets measured gets done. For example, providing the dashboards that measure the effectiveness of your IT spend, the security of your business, or the productivity of your people. Take, for example, the productivity of your people, identifying where the hotspots of Teams usage is, which teams are using video most, so you can start asking what value is your organization getting from Teams and what changes, what nudges should you be making on your people and their teams. Let's move on to Workplace 2021. Now, the current IT strategy many organizations have isn't fit for purpose because the post-COVID office will be very different to the pre-COVID office. The big question is, can you take advantage of your COVID-19 experience and become a successful, thriving, hybrid or 100% remote business? Now, the opportunity, I'd say, is obvious. With your people working remotely, you can save 60 to 80% of your office costs, for example. You can recruit from a larger talent pool and you'll hold on to your better people for longer. So fundamentally, the post-COVID workplace has to move on from the focus of the office to everywhere. Home, collaborative workspaces, mobile, on holiday, and the office. Or I mean the traditional office when I say the office. Now, the new post-COVID IT strategy we call the Workplace 2021. Now, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes introducing the three co-components of the Workplace 2021: Teams, Microsoft Voice, and cybersecurity. Now, Teams doesn't need any introduction. We've all had those aha moments during the COVID when we've realized the value of Teams. Unfortunately, many of the organizations I talk to are just muddling through, just using it for chat, carrying on the way they've always worked, and not using the true value it offers to really maximize the productivity of their people. So today, we're going to drill down in the demonstration into the collaboration and co-authoring features you really need to know about. Let's touch briefly on Microsoft Voice, another key component of Workplace 2021. We have a webinar on the 29th of September that specifically covers off Microsoft Voice, but just briefly, let's cover this a little bit. Now, what Business Voice ultimately does is replaces your existing telephony system, delivering all of your traditional phone services via Microsoft Teams, integrating your traditional calling functionality with Microsoft 365. As a result of Microsoft Voice, your calling capabilities, chat, and meetings are now unified in the single Teams app, allowing you to make calls on your PC, smartphone, or a more traditional desk phone. Let me bring the mood down a little with a little cautionary tale around cybersecurity. Very recently, a good friend of mine that works as the Chief Operating Officer at a 60-user city firm, as a result of their experience of COVID, decided they didn't need their expensive West End office and handed the keys back to their landlord for their 2,500 square foot of expensive West End office space. And instantly became, as a result of that, 100% remote business, realizing all the savings that come with a zero office space. Now, unfortunately, within some months of that, they fell foul to a major cyber attack, which resulted in a substantial financial loss to the business, with cyber attackers simply redirecting a substantial amount of company cash to another bank account in China. In this case, Barbara in the finance department received and opened, unfortunately, a spear phishing email, fooling her into providing her username and password. Now, the attackers then sat in Barbara's Office 365 account, waiting for anything juicy to come along. Now, the attacker or attackers saw this pending substantial transaction and set up mail forwarding rules to grab Barbara's email without her being aware of it. They changed the bank details to the hacker's account in China and sent it to the solicitors to execute on. And as a result of that, bang, the fraud was simply done. Now, this is a classic example of, in this case, cybersecurity not being fit for the new post-COVID world. Briefly, and let's make it brief because we want to move on to the demonstration of these great Teams features, productivity features. Let's briefly look at how this firm could have securely locked down the business using features they'd already purchased as part of Microsoft 365 and as a result stopped them from falling foul of this cyber fraud. Now, I like this slide a lot because it highlights the 5 touch points of the user, the device, application, email, and documents where you'll potentially have vulnerabilities within your business. Let's start with the user. You need to protect your business against an incident where one of your users has their credentials compromised. Now, passwords are the weakest link in any security chain, and without any additional levels of verification, they can become a single point of failure. That's why we believe strongly that if you only do one thing to help protect your business, it should be to turn on multi-factor authentication, or MFA, which can prevent 99.9% of identity attacks. Now, moving on to the device, the rise in BYOD has led to customers needing to protect their corporate data on users' personal devices. Now, what happens if a user's personal device is lost or compromised because they have a weak PIN, for example? And how do you prevent corporate data from being copied into a personal or third-party application? Now, there are features in Microsoft Intune that prevent data being copied from managed applications or corporate applications into personal applications, and forcing users to save corporate data into their OneDrive for Business rather than their own personal Dropbox, for example. Now, moving on to email, over half of cyber attacks are caused by malware through email, and those email attacks are only ever going to get more sophisticated. Now, a combination of user education, which is super important, and implementing Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection, which tests links and attachments before a user gets close to clicking on them, warning them if malicious content is detected, and also detecting emails from spoofed email addresses. These are so important in protecting the user around the area of email and also Teams too. Now, finally, let's talk about how protecting documents through classification, point of creation, can help with classified data leaking out of the business. How many of you have emailed the wrong document to the wrong person? Slightly or possibly highly embarrassing, but if that document had classified corporate data in it, it could also be damaging too. Now, using Azure Information Protection, or AIP, you can tag documents as highly confidential, for example, at point of creation. Then even if the document is sent accidentally externally by email, it cannot be viewed by the recipient. Now, adopting these 5 layers of security as part of Workplace 2021 will help you manage your post-COVID world so much better. So let's change gears and move on to a demo of the features in Microsoft Teams that can help your team and your people be the most productive possible. Okay, hopefully you can all see my demo tenant. Let's start by climbing straight into Teams by clicking on the Teams tab in the left-hand rail there. Using Teams within Teams is probably the most underutilized feature within the Teams app. And I'm going to make no apology for trying to change that today by bringing to life key features that will help you turbocharge your productivity within your work with your colleagues. Let's start with the basics by defining what a team is. Think of a team as a group of people with a common purpose. For example, you could have a team for your sales department or your finance department. You can see examples here within this tenant where we've exactly what we've gone and done. Or we could have a team for a project. We've got an example here of Mark 8. Or a team specifically focused on just the client. Now, generally, I'd suggest you limit the number of teams to about 10. And have as many channels as you'd like underneath to organize all the moving parts of that team. With each channel acting as one topic of conversation, and let channels grow organically. So don't overthink the channels you might need up front. By default, all conversations across the team are open to all members of that team. So we can see in Mark 8, we've got these additional channels that we've created, design, digital assets for the web, got a market and so on to manage key streams of that project. And you can see all the posts for all of those channels. They'll be open to all members of the team. Don't forget, it's really easy to add an external guest, be that a partner or a customer, to a team. As long as IT admin has set that function up, you can add them. All you need is their email address. Bang, off you go. Let's dive into a look at how we organize files in Teams, or should organize files in Teams. Now, Teams serves as a central repository for all documents relating to this channel. And as we can see in the design channel, we've got files. There's all the files relating to the design of this project will be found in this one repository, in this one location. There should be no other files in my inbox, in my file share somewhere, or even in Dropbox. All the files should be located here. This for me has been an absolute lifesaver, because what it really does is it removes the need for me to have to think through, well, should I be working on version 10 or version 3? Or I'm to reach out to a colleague to find out what the latest iteration of that file is, or trying to find it and search for it in my inbox. It gets rid of all of that horrible noise that we've all experienced over the years. Yeah, we've all had to live with that bad practice. Now, unfortunately, I often see customers using the General tab and create an old-fashioned file structure. We look here, I've gone and mirrored how I might run the Mark 8 project, but without using channels. In this case, I'm relying on simply what Teams creates as default with the General channel, and I can see here, I've got my traditional folder structure. This is the current way, the old way of organizing files in my organization. File share, hierarchical organization, bang, I'm simply reflecting this in Teams. That is not a good way of effective collaboration within Teams. One way of proving this isn't a great way of working within Teams is if I post a new file in Teams. So let's say I've been working on a file. I'm ready to share it with the team and ask for their comments on that file. So what I'll do, let's have a look. I've been working on some design work around the 7 Rocks DR thing there. So I'm going to upload that. And I'm going to ask the team to please review the file, and I'll post that. Okay, now if I go to the Files tab in the general channel, I can see, yep, the file is there, but you can see it's copied it to the root of this hierarchical file structure. And so it's left to me to have to then move that file into the location that it should be in. And over time, this isn't going to work. People are not going to move those files around, and they're going to leave them there. Yeah, it becomes quite unmanageable. So what the best approach is to do is to not follow that hierarchical structure, but create channels for each of those folders, as we can see here in the new way of collaborating within teams. And secondly, if I'm working in this old way where I've simply using the general channel to store all files and also have all conversations, do you know what? You get to the point where you can't see the wood for the trees. You don't know what's relevant to you. And I've been in the situation where I join a video call and my manager's asking whether I've read the latest post, I've reviewed the latest file. And I haven't, because I haven't seen it, because it's lost in all the other noise that's going on. Let's move on to the key topic of co-authoring. What you're actually able to do in Teams is to co-author and collaborate on documents in real time with your colleagues. And if we go into Files, load up the usability test document. Now I can edit this file in numerous ways. I can edit it within Teams. I've got the recognizable word ribbon there. I can open it up in a browser, or I can open it in the desktop app, full desktop app as well. Now I'm just going into the browser version of this file, the usability test file. I can instantly see that I'm being told that there's activity to catch up, and i.e. one of my colleagues has been editing that document and is telling me, do I want to see those changes? But what I've got here is on my smartphone. Let's bring this up. I've also got this file open. I'm a different user, and I can see, for example, I'm working away. So this is a draft reference. Yep. So I'm just making some edits to the file, and I can see who that user is. And that section of the document is blocked while they're editing it, yeah? So it's blocked for that user, mod administrator, so nobody can overwrite the changes they're making to it. Now, as my colleagues and I are editing the document, it is being saved all the time. So multiple versions are continually being saved. Yes, you're not going to lose anything. And I can see, for example, where all those versions are. So at any point, if there's been an issue, if there's been an error, I can always go back to the version that's right for us. I can also save that, yeah, if I wanted to, because I might want to use that as a starting point of another document that I want to create. So co-authoring and using SharePoint, because it's SharePoint in the background that is storing all our files and storing all the various versions that we're building up as we edit, co-author this document, collaborate on it together. It removes all that need for having to have naming conventions, which is version 10 final, version 10 final draft, version 10 final draft 27th of September. Yeah, it removes all those ways we've had to cope with over the years. Files should only be stored in the channel, and as I'm co-authoring live with my clients, I've got versions being saved for me that I can always go back to. So I haven't got to have those crazy naming conventions any longer. Wow, what a lifesaver in terms of time. Let's talk about the checkout feature, which can be of value during the co-authoring and collaborating phase of a project. It's a great way of protecting your document and stopping others from making changes to it. I'm going to click on the Files tab, I'm going to select a file, let's say it's the usability tests and priorities, click on the ellipse, go more, and I'm going to check that file out. Now that locks that file to me, and you can see there's a little red arrow, and for others they'll be able to see my name to it so they can see who's actually got that checked out. Now the use case for this is I don't want, perhaps I'm working on a file exclusively and I don't want others making changes to it. I'm happy for them to review it and I value their feedback on the review, but I don't want them changing it. So another user could click on that file, review it, and then they could pass on the comment back to me saying, I'd suggest the following changes. And we'll post that. Close that down, go into posts, for example. And then on this conversation thread, I'd be able to see all the comments that are being posted as conversational feedback around that file. That's where I'll be able to pick them up. So I'll be able to look at all the feedback on conversation, choose the ones that I want to take advantage of, and edit the file while I've got it checked out. Safe in the knowledge nobody else is editing that file where I'm working on it. Great little feature. Now the other option is to collaborate on a video call rather than co-authoring on the document. For example, I could go into and organize an impromptu video call. Meet now. So all my colleagues, call all my colleagues into this call. They've all been invited. I'm going to share my desktop. And this is the file we want to share. So everybody on the video call would be able to see this and we could work on it. So I've got control of the keyboard, so I could be typing away, making changes. We could be conversing, we can agreeing on what changes, updates live together, working on that file together. Equally, I could hand control back to somebody else who's got a great idea and they want to drive the keyboard, be the keyboard warrior. Wow, it's a great way of that kind of dynamic collaboration. Co-authoring is great, yeah, but it's a little bit isolating. But the use case for that is got to get my head down. I'm editing that file, working to a deadline, and we're all making our contributions using the live co-authoring kind of capabilities with SharePoint, driving all that version control and saving it for me. But equally, sometimes it's nice to have that dynamic interaction with my colleagues, and this is a fine example of where working together on a video call really does work. Okay, let's move on. Back to Teams. What I want to do now is talk about using or thinking of using Teams as your exclusive user interface for all your collaborative work. It's the UI that I live in most of the day. Well, it is actually the case for me. But information often lives across a variety of different services. They could be, for example, Zoom. You could be using Zoom rather than Teams video conferencing. You could be using Dropbox rather than OneDrive or SharePoint. You could be using Power BI data, which could be of value to the Mark 8 project, for example. And there are many other SaaS-based services that you'll be wanting to take advantage of that have got good data in there that contribute to the project, for example. But what we want to do is but what we want to do is not having users having to toggle out to different applications and different UIs. Why don't I pull those in? So let's look at an example of how that might work. Let's go to the Research and Development channel, and we've got here a Power BI tab. So what I've gone and done is I've got a Power BI dashboard, and we've got some live information which is important to the Mark 8 project around, for example, the digital assets for the web. And I can click through that as I would if I was using Power BI in its own UI. Yeah, fantastic. So I get an example of pulling in different SaaS-based services into the Teams UI so I don't have to toggle out. It's very easy to build that out, so I can create other tabs alongside the Power BI, be it using other Microsoft applications or very powerfully using the many third-party applications you might be using. I said Zoom, I've said Dropbox, etc., etc. Yeah, and they're always being added to. So it's really Microsoft are really encouraging you to use Teams as your single UI for all that collaborative work that you need to do with your colleagues. Another example of that is if we go to Files. Now, by default, Microsoft provide you with SharePoint and OneDrive for all your files sharing, file serving requirements within Teams, within Microsoft 365, for example. But hey, I might have a bunch of users that use Dropbox, and I want to be using Dropbox as I use SharePoint. Yeah. So what I've gone and done here is connected my Dropbox account with its pretty classic kind of hierarchical directory structure in, and I'd be able to then use Dropbox within the context of Teams as I would use OneDrive, and we saw the file sharing capabilities within the channels within Teams, within the Teams. So again, it's showing how you can integrate all your various other services into Teams and using Teams as your single UI. Okay, hopefully you can see my slide deck again now. Let's move on and do let's do a recap and discuss some best practices we suggest that you should adopt. Now, when I'm discussing Office 365 with clients, I find many of them are struggling to decide whether they should be using OneDrive, Teams, or SharePoint to store their files as they migrate away from traditional file servers and file shares and into Microsoft Cloud and Office 365, Microsoft 365. Now, in this case, we recommend that you should follow what we call the me, we, and everyone approach. Now, OneDrive is my me space. Instead of using a personal drive on a file server, I use OneDrive to create and store my files. I use OneDrive for my draft documents that I'm not ready just yet to share and co-author with my colleagues. When I'm part of a group, collaborating on a project, perhaps it's a file I started working on in OneDrive, in my MySpace, then I'll move that into Microsoft Teams. I'll copy it up. In this situation, the file now belongs to the team, not to me. And the whole team will be able to see that file and edit that file also. Now, the everyone space is what we call, is SharePoint. When we need to share content with everyone across the whole organization, we use SharePoint. It's ideal for example, for employee communications around benefits and other HR stuff, product information, policies, procedures, etc. Typically, this type of information is read-only for the most of the people in the organization, and just the owners of that content having full permissions. Using SharePoint to distribute the file is a way of saying this file is done and is ready to be published. I might have started the file, working on the file in my OneDrive, I've co-authored it in Teams, but now I'm putting it in its finished state as a PDF into SharePoint for everyone to be able to view and use. Now, let's move on to discussing where you use Outlook and where you use Teams. I'd consider Teams as your virtual workplace for all departmental and project activities and communications. Email should ultimately only be used for more formal communications, be it with your partner or your customers' proposals, for example, contracts, etc. All other communications and collaboration should happen within Teams. Now let's move on to working with and managing files in Teams. And that's the whole collaboration and co-authoring piece. Just want to recap on what we saw in the demonstration. Managing files is a critical component of using Teams. And I'd really strongly urge you, as we looked at in the demonstration, that you don't mimic the kind of hierarchical file structure you've got in the old world within Teams. Flatten that structure out using channels to do that. It's important to remember where files are stored within Teams. If I'm working in chat, in a private chat, on a one-to-one basis or a group chat, that file is stored in my OneDrive and I shared it from my OneDrive. And if I'm working as part of a team, we're working on content in the channel, then that file will be stored in SharePoint. Finally, let's do a recap of the ways to collaborate. For example, I could simply share my desktop or document or application on a video call and then talk through changes either in a one-to-one chat or, for example, a one-click team call. And I can drive the keyboard myself or pass control to one of my colleagues to drive the keyboard and interact in that fashion. I could edit a document alone and then use that mention to tag people or a group or a team in a post when updates be made where I want them and I want to bring to their attention that, hey, I've made these changes. I'd love your comments upon those changes. Moving on to co-authoring. Obviously, co-authoring is a big deal with the ability to see live updates your colleagues are making. The ability to see all the versions that are being created over time and being able to roll back to them. And what change has been made since you last worked on that file. So when I come dip back into the file, I can see, okay, what's changed. That's so, what would I say? It's so, not enlightening, I suppose, productive. It's the most productive way of working, isn't it? You could also use a video call with colleagues while using live co-authoring, where you're not sharing a screen in this occasion. It's just kind of face-to-face video calls, and that might provide a dynamic which works well for you. And finally, you could use conversations inside the document. And we looked at that in the context of using checkout, where I want to control edits of that file. I lock that out using the checkout feature, but tag people and ask them for their feedback through the conversation. I will then collate and sift through that feedback and make those changes myself, and then I can check that document back in. Okay, let's start bringing this to a conclusion, the webinar to a conclusion. Let's start with our Workplace 2021 high-level assessment. We've introduced the Workplace 2021 assessment today. We very much focused on teams and in this case co-authoring and drive productivity improvements. We also touched upon voice and we also touched upon how important cybersecurity will be in this more flexible hybrid world. And what we do with the workplace with this high-level assessment, it's free. Absolutely no obligations you take this further, but it's an investment of time where we'll do a comprehensive assessment, understand where you are now, where you need to get to, help work with you to develop that IT strategy around Workplace 2021 and provide you with a report, a fully cost report of what it will take to get there. So I would highly recommend you take advantage of this. It's a quick 3 to 5 day engagement. It's free. Absolutely no obligations attached to that. So take advantage of it if the time is right for you. Now, if the time isn't right and you want to continue, but you want to continue feeding the brain and investing in coming up to speed, what you can do around Microsoft Cloud and Microsoft 365, Office 365 and so on. So some feeding the brain activity. We're coming to the conclusion of our summer webinar series. So we're looking at the collab and co-authoring webinar. We're just in the middle of that. We've got one final event in September next week. I think it's the 29th. I've got 30th there, but I'm sure it's the 29th, which is all about Microsoft Voice. Aside from that, and aside from technology really, is our 7-part video series, which looks at the more kind of softer thing, the people thing. Okay, we can invest in the technology and we can make it as smart as possible and maximize the investment you get out of that technology. But really, we're working in new ways. Yeah, we're asking our people to work from home and be more flexible in where they work and how they work with their colleagues. And what we've got here is a 7-part video series which shares how you can become a remote meeting ninja, how to become the best manager of remote teams possible, how to be a productive individual working from home, what should your home office setup look like. So really invaluable content that you might find of value. Anyway, that's it. I hope you found today's webinar on Teams of great value. And I look forward to possibly seeing you next week on the Microsoft Voice webinar And I'd really value your feedback on, we're building out the next quarters, running up to Christmas, the next quarter webinar series. So when we reach out to you over the coming days, it'd be great to get your feedback on the kind of topics you'd like to see covered, or you'd like your colleagues to see covered. So anyway, please, if you can, share that feedback. But in the meantime, have a great day and stay well. Cheers. Bye-bye.